I hate my cell phone. The peak signal area is the size of a small basketball court, and far from always getting 4 lanes, I'm lucky for 2, even downtown. Here in the middle of nowhere, I'm lucky for 1, depending on the phase of the moon, how I hold the phone, and what names of the gods I say as I slowly move the phone around the room until I catch a stray signal from the nearest tower. My boss, Joel Woodlake, the majority owner of our business and managing partner, has a BlackBerry that could probably catch a good signal on the far side of the moon. The bastard could run his entire life with that little gizmo, and he does. He watches sports on it, trades stocks, does all his banking, and even plays pony online with brokers. Yes, sometimes he even works a little bit when he's not playing golf on it. It's good to be the boss, I guess. He owns 66% of the company, the rest is controlled by old neighborhood friends from Philadelphia who invested in the venture. I've never met them, but I've heard some scary stories through a friend of a friend that suggests they have mob ties. Not the nicest of acquaintances if a business deal goes south. Apparently, oops, sorry, isn't the way to go. They don't know me from Adam, and I'd like to keep it that way. I'm strictly a salaried employee, living from paycheck to paycheck and waiting for those rare moments when I get to stand up and beg to get sales bonuses or a tiny annual profit-sharing check. As the head tech and chief hardware officer for the company, I should get a small bonus from each initial sales commission every time I help one of the salespeople if they close a deal, but the funny thing is, those checks are very rare. Our company installs computerized alarm systems and home automation systems that are pretty high-end. It's a pretty good product that is usually well demonstrated to the knowledgeable customer, especially working young professional couples. With micro cameras in every room, the young mom can go back to her job and still watch everything the nanny or maid is doing on her computer screen at work. The only downside is that we do not own the exclusive rights to this product and do not manufacture it. Someday, some clever and well-funded competitor will come along that can buy these devices in bulk and squeeze us on price. That's not my problem. Hopefully, when that day comes, I'll be working somewhere else. Or even a new competitor. Yes, my job sucks and I should quit, but the economy is a little sluggish right now and no one will be busting down my door this week expecting to kiss the ring on my pinky finger. I'm slowly looking for something better, but for now, I'm content to wait. Better to have some money than none at all. Terry, my wife, also works, and I think we do pretty well, but she doesn't think so. We both make about the same amount of money, but she spends money much faster than I do. She is a very attractive woman and always likes to show off her assets. She likes to dress smartly, even for work, and she likes to turn heads and attract admirers wherever she goes. She's also a bit of a flirt and can easily get the attention of anyone she wants. Things aren't perfect in our marriage, but I was sure I couldn't find anyone better than her, at least in terms of looks, if we ever broke up. It helped keep my mind and hands on when we were fighting or going through tough times. Terry works as a senior accountant for a fairly large accounting firm. It's a pretty decent job at a well-known local company with a reputation for treating its employees much better than their competitors. Her salary isn't the highest, but they offer a good benefits package, paid training, annual bonuses, lots of parties and other events, and extremely flexible hours. They have a lot of flexible hours. So her work schedule is erratic and she gets a lot of compensatory time off in lieu of overtime pay. She also has to travel several times a month, usually overnight, but she enjoys it. She is also often allowed to work from home and usually works remotely at least 1 day a week. This would be ideal for us if we had children, but it didn't work out that way until about 4 months ago, when she announced that she was finally pregnant for the first time. This surprised me immensely, as I had assumed she was still on the pill and we hadn't discussed starting a family recently. Still, 30-something is not a bad time to start a family, and if you keep waiting for the right time, you can wait forever. She seemed happy, and I decided that I would be happy too. All in all, I thought we had a pretty decent marriage. Sure, we fought a lot, but I didn't consider it a serious problem. And compared to most of our friends, our relationship seemed to be one of the best. But Terry was a woman who was hard to satisfy, let alone make happy. We were somehow barely living within our means. Terry didn't like living frugally, but she really liked to keep up with the Joneses. That meant we paid for a nice late-model car for her, an expensive closet, with frequent updates, Regular spa and hair salon services, a house that was more than we needed and took almost all of my basic salary just to handle the payments. But I usually thought it was all worth it. My illusions that we were doing fine as a couple were dispelled when I borrowed Joel's BlackBerry to make a routine call during our sales trip together. He had an important business meeting with a major residential developer on the golf course and didn't want to be interrupted for any reason so he could close the deal. So he left his cell phone with me. The potential client was old-fashioned and would probably demand 100% of Joel's personal time for the next 3 hours, which would more or less leave me hanging in the wind out of boredom, but it was better than a day spent in the office. The deal was to supply and install over 100 security and home automation devices for inclusion in an ongoing builder's project, and will definitely improve sales this quarter. I might even get a small bonus on this deal. I spent the next few hours sitting at the 19th hole, the country club bar, sipping iced tea while waiting for them to finish their round of golf and business conversations. I wasn't quite sure why I was even needed at this meeting, but apparently Joel just wanted me around so he could deal with any urgent tech-related issues a builder might have. I was beginning to think about calling the office to get Joel's hypothetical delivery details for me, when suddenly my own cell phone rang to let me know that it had finally picked up a tower signal, and I could use it. And so I did. There would be no problem with the promise to deliver the units in about 2 weeks, and at least 3 full crews would be ready to install. The bastard would be satisfied. And in my opinion, he was now obligated to do me a small favor. I decided to grant it myself by sneaking a peek at his BlackBerry and seeing what hot stock tips he'd been getting lately. It seemed like his stockbrokers were constantly emailing him the latest market tips, and he was constantly bragging about what great brokers he had. Instead of going through his old emails, I somehow hit the wrong button and ended up in the wrong menu altogether. I've always hated the tiny buttons on my BlackBerry, which is why I don't have one. I have fat fingers. I admit it. Trying to get out of it, I pressed redial, and things suddenly got very interesting. The last number Joel had dialed a little earlier in the morning was my wife's cell phone. How the hell did Joel get my wife's cell phone number, and why? I quickly cut the connection before she could answer. I was now a man with a specific mission. After poking around some more, I finally got into his email archive and found several folders of saved text messages and emails from his brokers. There were 3. Other business friends and associates, silent partners, and last but not least, a folder of material from his more intimate partners, my wife among them. From the text messages alone, it was quite clear that they had been having an affair for some time, perhaps almost a year. The candid pictures taken by the phone camera removed any vestiges of doubt. Heck, my wife had never sent a single nude photo of herself, much less one as explicit as this one. I was amazed and dumbfounded. Indeed, I had no idea that all of this was happening right under my nose. They were very careful, prudent, and clever. If it hadn't been for my accidental access to Joel's BlackBerry, I never would have known what they were up to. They were extremely cautious and smart. But now I'd have a chance to prove that I could be smarter than that, or at least a little nastier. I had about 2 hours of quiet time, and I needed almost every minute of it. Working with cell phones, especially the BlackBerry, was on the edge of my technological comfort zone. In order to do what I wanted to do, I would need the skills of a specialist, the kind of expert I didn't know, but I knew someone who could. Oscar the Grouch. Not the green talking carpet specimen on Sesame Street, but the one who kept a spy toy store in a suburban shopping center not too far from the golf course. This Oscar was much more grumpy and harder to deal with. We bought a lot of specialty extras and supplies from him, and he knew me pretty well and tolerated me. I also had a trump card up my sleeve. Oscar, oh great and wise one, I began my preamble. You are shrewd and omniscient. May your wisdom bring joy to the heart of this poor cuckold. Teach me, splendid one, the secrets of cloning the crackberry, so that I may take vengeance on my unworthy adversaries. Oscar did not like cheating wives. A few years ago, his ex-girlfriend had robbed him of everything he owned. He warmed to me almost immediately, and within minutes we were in his private office, and Joel's BlackBerry was being taken apart by the skillful hands of a master craftsman. An hour later, I had a perfect clone in my hands that received everything Joel sent or received, and all his passwords. The The costs were very modest, mostly just the cost of a new BlackBerry and a few other necessary parts. Oscar loved making money, but he hated cheating wives even more. Revenge was his favorite coin, and I assured him he would not be disappointed. Tucking my new silent mode toy away in the bottom of my bag, I made it back to the clubhouse on the golf course in time for another invigorating iced tea before Joel and our new client finished their game. I was surprised at how polite I could be to my boss after learning that he regularly slept with my wife. I just smiled a lot, imagining him being sodomized with a red-hot poker, and muttered to myself, "I'll get you, sucker." When I was assured that the contract was ready to be signed and the deal was done, my presence was no longer required, and I went back to work and spent the rest of the day brooding in my office. My revenge would take time. I really wanted it done right. My boss had never treated me fairly and had basically cheated me out of possibly many thousands of dollars in earned bonuses that I had never received. And now the theft of my wife from me was the last straw. The first step was to completely and comprehensively download everything on my new cloned BlackBerry onto a real computer so I could see what I was doing and couldn't accidentally delete or change anything on my perfectly copied phone. Plus, any mistakes I made could have affected Joel's original phone as well, possibly alerting him that his device was no longer secure. That took some time. Boy, he had a lot of junk files, and apparently he never deleted anything. When I was done, I could now safely read on my computer everything Joel had stored on his phone, with almost 3 years' worth of information. I could now use this information against him to plan the most terrible and complete revenge. I didn't get much real work done over the next few days, but otherwise the office was fairly quiet and I had time to go through and study all of Joel's files, emails, and messages. Slowly, a comprehensive plan was forming in my head, but it would take time to put it into action. At least now I fully understood the background of the situation. Joel was definitely a thief, and not just because he stole my wife. He was stealing money from the company left and right from every place he could, including the obvious known problem of stealing money from employee commissions and bonuses. We were also overpaying for most supplies and outside services, for which Joel was obviously getting big cash kickbacks. He was also undercharging each sales contract to almost cost of sales, according to our records, but was secretly billing most of our large customers at a much higher rate. Money seemed to be flowing under the table from all directions. I was sure that his silent partners knew nothing of this clandestine double accounting and would certainly be more than interested. The loot, and there was a lot of it, was mostly in the capable hands of Joel's stockbrokers. There were 3 of them in all, each having roughly equal shares of the initial money, which they were carefully collecting for later betting. One of Joel's brokers was an undoubted genius and played the ups and downs of the recent stock market like a violinist at a concert. He had multiplied his working share of the money into a small fortune, many times Joel's original investment. I made a note to myself to be especially careful about this broker's financial advice. The other 2 brokers were competent and had also increased their shares, but nowhere near as much as the first. Each apparently considered himself Joel's sole financial advisor and knew nothing about the other competing accounts. That knowledge would have been very helpful. My wife Terry was involved in these accounting machinations up to her ears, both in preparing numerous sets of creatively designed books and ledgers and as his primary mistress. Her business trips were nothing more than monthly erotic rendezvous with Joel at some posh hotel or resort, away from the prying eyes of the locals. Oh, they still managed to have weekly love-making dates, usually at an expensive local hotel, but sometimes at a motel if they were feeling particularly vicious or naughty. She liked secret sex with cheating, and she also kept her eyes on the big jackpot she'd helped raise Joel. Apparently her goal was to eventually dump me and change me by becoming Mrs. Joel Woodlake. I'm not sure she would have been amused to learn that there are at least 3 other young ladies who are currently seeking the same position as well. Joel apparently had a very active and busy sex life, which included several other married women whom he took turns dating. Oh, he seemed to be particularly fond of Terry and definitely enjoyed having her, but he wasn't planning on marrying anyone. If he had to flee, he'd probably try to run alone. Terry, on the other hand, wasn't about to let Joel run away. especially since he was absolutely the father of Terry's growing child. That was something she herself had admitted to him in one of their loving text messages to each other. All thoughts that I could retaliate more gently and try to repair our relationship were forever discarded. From now on, it would be scorched earth. The other information on the BlackBerry was somewhat interesting, but not as important at this point. I had full access to all of his bank information and brokerage accounts, but it was too early to play with them. He had an active account at a local gambling organization, and he ponied up on increasing numbers of bets quite often, betting via text message. He didn't win often, but he didn't lose often either. Currently, this account had a small positive balance, and he was approved for a loan of up to $50,000. He had a similar credit account at a casino in Reno with a slightly larger amount in the account and a pre-approved signature credit of at least $200,000. Joel had been there several times and gambled big, losing a large sum on his first visit, but quickly paid off his debt. He last visited the casino 2 months ago, apparently with Terry, and came out slightly ahead, but left his winnings in the casino account. The casino would be very happy to see Joel again in the near future. Having carefully gathered all this information, I began to formulate my plan. I was in no hurry to put it into action. There seemed to be no need to rush things or act hastily. I decided to carefully put all the pieces of the puzzle together first and wait for a lucky break. Sharing a house with a cheating whore who only pretended to be my loving wife was easier than I thought. Our paths hardly crossed for the next few weeks as she pretended to be busy and tired from her busy work schedule. In my eyes, she was nothing more than a lecherous slut, and the few times we had sex, I took unexpected pleasure in treating her that way. She took to my aggressive lovemaking with a significant new interest. She had obviously gotten used to the rough treatment from her other lover Joel over the days and was beginning to enjoy it. Oddly enough, our sex life had improved. I didn't mind using my wife as a dirty slut. It gave me an opportunity to vent my anger and use her just as I would use the lowest of street whores. I called her dirty words, bit her, spanked her, and pinched her. She loved every minute of it. Sometimes I think if we had just communicated better with each other and she had told me about her more submissive sex needs, we might have found common ground, and maybe she wouldn't have needed to cheat. I began to feel emotionally confused and conflicted between my renewed affection for my wife and my growing need to punish and destroy Joel. I even began to wonder if Terry had begun to reconsider her affair with Joel, and I think if pushed a little, she might even confess her relationship. But as it was, she was still scheduled to meet with him the following week. And in the weeks that followed, new photos and short videos on Joel's BlackBerry showed that they had some good fun, mostly in bed, during her next business trip later that month. I guess the lure of money was still too strong for her. Over the next month, I kept a close eye on Joel's cloned BlackBerry so that I would know exactly what was going on with both parties to the affair, and be ready to act at a moment's notice if things suddenly began to change. It happened sooner than I expected, but I was more than ready. I was making a late afternoon visit to Terry's office to make photocopies of some of Joel's forged accounting documents when I saw an ad on the company bulletin board in the copy room. I had made a copy of the key to Terry's office a while back and knew when the coast was very likely to be clear and no one would see or remember my visits. After a cursory reading of the notice, the final steps of my revenge plan suddenly came to mind. It was a terrifying and audacious plan, and if it went wrong, I would be trapped with no hope of escape. But it felt so right. The ad was for a memorial service for one of the firm's chief accountants who had died the day before in a hit-and-run pedestrian accident. I recognized her name, Betty Mitchell. She was the accounting manager who oversaw Joel's firm's accounts and personally prepared the annual income statements and other reports that were sent to the other partners. Her bookkeeping was honest. As they say, garbage in, garbage out. It wasn't her fault that Joel and Terry supplied her with highly inaccurate forged documents on which to operate. According to all the news reports, her death was ruled a tragic and unfortunate accident. The car that hit her had been stolen less than an hour earlier by several teenagers who had panicked and abandoned the wrecked car at the scene of the accident. Nothing sinister, just bad luck. She was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But with the right materials in the right hands, you can come up with a less innocent explanation. And I had just the right materials at hand. I finished making photocopies of Betty's large collection of original financial documents, especially bills and expenses that I knew were fraudulent. Then I made a late visit to our office and effortlessly found suitable original untainted documents in Joel's secret files hidden in the back room and made several sets of photocopies. Together, I stuffed these sets of before and after documents into a large manila mailing envelope with the printed return address of the accounting firm and carefully addressed the package to a senior member of Joel's unclassified partnership. On the back of the envelope, I couldn't resist writing in neat, typed but unmarked handwriting, "To be mailed and opened in the event of my death, Betty." This, of course, would open a very unpleasant can of worms, but that was only phase 1 of my master plan. Phase 2 was much simpler. Using my clone, I sent a message to Joel's top broker and instructed him to bust a sweat, liquidate everything, and go all in on a highly recommended and can't-miss stock that he had informed Joel about earlier that day. I sent a message to Joel's second broker to also liquidate his holdings immediately, but then transfer all the funds to a new offshore bank account I had just set up. The third, most unlucky broker, was also instructed to snap up the stock and open a short position in the same stocks that the first broker had chosen to skyrocket. Phase 3 was next and went just as smoothly. I contacted Joel's bookie and placed a large number of wildly random bets on next week's upcoming horse races, mostly long shots that had no chance of paying out. Just in case one of the bets did turn out to be a winner, I instructed the bookie to hold all the winnings and put them on a particular horse that was running in a major national race the following Sunday. Phase 4 was also pretty simple. I sent an email to Joel's casino VIP guest relations department, letting them know I would be arriving the following weekend, and asked them to book a suite and fully utilize my approved credit limit at the casino. They responded almost instantly, confirming my reservation. Phase 5 dealt with the more mundane aspects of my scorched earth campaign. I wasn't too concerned about what to do with the house or our other marital property. The house was fully mortgaged in both our names, and with the downturn in the housing market, we had virtually no equity. Our joint accounts were similarly meager and required no adjustment. Moreover, I was particularly careful to make sure that all of our recent bank transactions were within normal parameters. There would probably be some kind of investigation, and I didn't want there to be the slightest suspicion that I was preparing some sort of escapade of my own. A foreign bank account was opened under someone else's name, also courtesy of Oscar Groch, through a public computer in the library, using numerous proxy servers to completely hide my online footprints. Phase 6 was equally routine, but very necessary. I prepared packets of emails accompanied by saved photos of a very explicit and pornographic nature to send to the 3 other husbands with whom Joel was having cuckolded affairs. I didn't want to mail them yet, but the messages were prepared and ready to go at a moment's notice. Now all that was left was to get things in order. My work computer, which I had used to download materials from the cloned BlackBerry, I cleaned completely and thoroughly. Then I banged the original hard drive 40 or 50 times against the cement floor before it finally went to the bottom of the local lake. Terry's laptop I left completely untouched. I was sure incriminating emails and other documents would be found on it, but I had more than enough information from other sources. None of my fingerprints had touched this device. I hoped that would help keep my ass safe. For the next 2 days, I was especially careful and vigilant about monitoring incoming messages for Joel, and I only had to intercept and delete 2 messages that would cause him alarm or concern. On Friday, just after lunch, I transferred the virus I had received from Oscar to Joel's real BlackBerry and listened with rapt attention as Joel discovered his cell phone was on the fritz. I kindly offered to take it to a repair shop and assured him that everything could be repaired in about a week or so. Heh. The final act in this drama was to organize my own business trip, which was to begin the following Monday. It actually wasn't hard to come up with a good legitimate reason to leave town, and I'd already made phone calls to arrange it. One of our biggest old customers is in Carson City, Nevada, and they were having some minor software problems with their security computer system, and they wanted me to come down there for a day or two to fix the problem. It would be an easy fix. But at the same time, I could exaggerate the severity of the problem for a few days if I needed more time away from home to unwind. Terry was pleased to hear that I would be taking a little road trip. "You don't get out of town and have fun that often," she remarked. She didn't mind either when I said I'd be leaving Saturday afternoon, since it was almost impossible to find a Sunday flight to Carson City that late. That probably suited her plans just fine. I was sure she'd take the opportunity to sleep with Joel while I was gone. She was certainly regretting something, but her tumultuous affair with Joel didn't seem to have cooled off much. Then again, I'm sure she was blinded by the money. The millions of dollars that would soon be in her lascivious fingers. Saturday morning, we had some great goodbye sex. It was old-fashioned tender lovemaking, the kind we used to do together in the happy early years of our marriage, and for a minute I thought she was waking up to a guilty conscience and maybe even ready to confess. Something inside her seemed to click, as if she realized exactly what she had lost because of her affair with Joel. Maybe if I stayed a few minutes longer, she'd confess to me. Maybe we could have worked things out, maybe not. We'd never know. She kissed me lovingly goodbye at the airport as passengers disembarked, and I never saw her again. The trip to Carson City went off without a hitch, and I rented a car for the short drive to Reno. Oscar Grout supplied me with a new first-class but expensive fake ID in the name of Joel Woodlake. And within minutes of my arrival, the casino was eating my hands, eager to let me dig as big a hole for myself as I could afford. I was amazed at how few obstacles I had to overcome to get my credit advance. I expected a bunch of paperwork, fingerprints, or even a retina scan, but all I had to do was smile, show my ID, give my casino reservation and account number, and sign in illegible scribbles on the receipt they put on my desk. I was wearing one of Joel's old college jackets from the University of Southern California, a wig to match his hair color, covered by a baseball cap and Joel's aviator sunglasses. I did my best to keep my face out of the security camera as I collected my first $50,000 in chips, but it was obvious that they either didn't care much about security or didn't want to risk offending one of their VIP customers. I squandered that first stack of chips like a drunken sailor on shore leave before the buffet was even served in the restaurant, and got out of bed a broken but happy man with a pair of $1,000 high-end hookers under my arm as I headed to bed. They were worth every cent of Joel's money. I'll remember that night for a very long time. Naturally, they cleaned out my room before tiptoeing out early in the morning from every dime I had left in cash from the previous night, but that was to be expected. I had thoughtfully left my personal money, Idaho and the like, locked in the rental car and hid the car key under the couch cushion. Sunday morning, I signed for my next $50,000 pile of chips and began cautiously playing much more conservatively to try to come out almost in the plus side. I pretended to spend money like a drunken sailor on layoff, but tried to play wisely so I wouldn't lose a lot of money. After lunch, I recruited myself another group of high-paying assholes and screwed them by giving them $500 in chips each for putting on a good wood show to get us all warmed up for the second round of fun. I then signed for another $50,000, but I was smart with that money too. I was perceived as a high roller, but I quietly stashed at least half of those chips. In the evening, I collected my last $50,000 of play money and stashed all those chips so I could cash out later using my real identity. I suppressed the urge to cash out my total winnings of just over $132,000 in chips under my name and limited myself to collecting $7,000 in petty cash. That was enough to avoid reporting to the IRS, and I made it out of Reno with my head still attached to my body. I had a lot of casino money left in chips, still waiting to be collected, but I could come back in a few weeks to sort it out. I wanted enough time to pass that some overly smart cashier manager wouldn't suddenly remember that I'd impersonated Joel weeks or months earlier. To be safer, I would also have to cash out in small amounts, preferably no more than $10K at a time. Inconvenient, but definitely the safest way to get the money. The stolen $125,000 was far more than I expected to get, and now Joel was on the hook for the full $200,000. I was sure they'd want the money back immediately. especially since Joel never officially checked out of his room and seemed to have just run away. Late Sunday night, back in my hotel room in Carson City, I checked my clone phone to see what was going on. Things were already starting to trickle out. Joel's partners had received my little package in the mail on Saturday and were already upset beyond belief. By now, they had left over 10 voicemails for Joel, which, apparently due to his real phone not working, he had not received. The last 2 messages had explicitly hinted that their friends would be paying him a visit soon to get answers. It was time to finish cleaning up. Knowing all of Joel's regular checking and savings accounts and having full online access to them via my cloned phone, I set up an automatic fund transfer to clear all of Joel's accounts and transfer their balances to my hidden offshore account. I then did the same with 3 other small emergency accounts at other banks. When I was done, Joel's total net worth was, roughly, $18 and change. The updated brokerage account data I received early Monday morning also gave me great pleasure. The Uber broker gave accurate advice, and in the 2 days of trading since my buy order, the value of the stock and the entire portfolio has risen nearly 50%. The broker even advised me to hold the position for another day to expect the stock price to rise further. I sent him a brief confirmation, but gave him a firm order to sell and liquidate the entire account no later than 3 p.m. Monday Eastern Time, when the market would close for the day. All funds were to be transferred to an overseas account. The second broker had already liquidated the account on Friday as instructed, and the funds were transferred without any difficulty. The third broker was in a panic over Joel's account, which was now in deep negative territory due to a short option that had abruptly misfired as I had anticipated. In fact, a margin call, a broker's requirement that additional cash be deposited into the account when the trader's asset value drops to a certain amount, was urgently needed to maintain the short position, or he would have been forced to close and freeze the trading account as of noon Eastern Time on Monday. Either way, Joel now owed someone else a large sum of money. I decided to keep this last account open and active. Eventually, Joel's partners would want to know where their money went, and an open account showing huge stock losses would be a great exhibit. The money in the account before the losses would also correlate quite well with the alleged losses from the embezzlement, which the partners could easily calculate just from my mailed papers. Of course, they were sure there was other money hiding somewhere, but it seemed to be a major money pot. Finally, I hit the send button to send out my surprise packages to 3 other unsuspecting horny husbands. Here, of course, I was not without outrage. I didn't expect them to go after Joel like a dog, but the more people who are pissed off at him, the better, I thought. Nothing promotes plausible deniability like adding another handful of angry suspects to an already overflowing pot. On Monday, I spent the entire day with my cell phone off, forcing myself to think only of my clients' needs in Carson City. I finished installing the updated software patches by noon, but spent the rest of the day running tests, and even offered to stay one more night to check things one last time in the morning before flying home. Late Monday night, Terry left one very disturbing voicemail message for me. She was scared and almost crying, but wouldn't say why. I called her back and left several more messages, but never heard back. She never called again. There was absolutely nothing new or important on Joel's cloned BlackBerry. Apparently, the partners had already finished talking. All of Joel's financial and brokerage accounts had been liquidated or administratively frozen. The gamblers had also started looking for Joel after he had bet on horse races and lost more than $27,000 in gambling over the weekend. Now everyone was all in, and the dancing had just begun. My job was done. With a sense of satisfaction from a job well done, I fell asleep with the sound sleep of a virtuous man. On the way to the airport on Tuesday, I smashed the cloned BlackBerry against the hard road surface a few dozen times, and eventually the shards were thrown into the local river. I burned my fake ID in Joel's name and slowly scattered the ashes on the way to the airport. Joel's USC jacket and cap were put in a Goodwill donation box, and I forgot my aviator sunglasses at the busy airport snack bar counter right before my flight. I'm sure someone else was happy to find them. Time to get home and see what kind of music the band was playing. On Tuesday, I walked into work for the first time late at night to report on my business trip and found a lock hanging on the front door. Joel had left, and now the silent partners were running things. They had seized all the documents and were conducting an exhaustive audit with the help of a private investigative firm whose employees were so muscular they seemed to have no necks at all. Apparently, they were professional, knee-jerk investigators. I left my name and home phone number and skedaddled home before they showed any particular interest in breaking my legs again, especially me. Terry wasn't home, and the house showed signs of hasty packing and even faster fleeing. I left everything untouched and called the police to file missing persons reports for my wife and Joel. It took over 4 hours for a police officer to arrive, and she left in less than 10 minutes, satisfied that it was a routine domestic separation. I didn't care what she thought about it, but I wanted a copy of the police report to show all the thugs and splinters who might show up on my doorstep that I was innocent and doing my own due diligence. The first thug, clearly working for the Philadelphia partners, showed up on my doorstep early Wednesday morning. I was as polite as I could be to a guy who looked like he had more in common with a gorilla than a human being. He didn't seem to be looking for me, and he certainly wasn't looking for Terry, and that gave me a bad feeling. He just wanted to look around, and I let him do that. He took most of our personal financial files and records, as well as Terry's personal computer, Mac. I hadn't seen her laptop and figured she took it with her when she ran away, probably with Joel. I got most of the files back about a month later in a box left on my doorstep. They kept the Mac, which was fine with me. I hated the damn thing and never used it. The mutilated and completely frozen bodies of Joel and Terry were found in a railroad freezer car in Idaho, some 10 days later. Both had apparently been subjected to brutal torture that I'd rather not even remember. There was a long list of suspects: business associates, gamblers, cuckolded husbands, and casino debt collectors. Everyone was questioned, but everyone was able to plead plausible deniability and reasonable doubt, and the police murder investigation stalled almost immediately. No one ever looked twice at me. I kept my head down and played the part of the grief-stricken widower, and that would continue for a long time to come. Except every few weeks, I take a short gambling trip to Reno, where I quietly cash in another small pile of Joel's gambling chips. I have not the slightest doubt that Joel's former business associates are responsible for their deaths. I know their names, their friends, and their peculiar proclivities for revenge. I could see it in the cold glint in their eyes when they expressed their condolences to me for their loss. I didn't expect Terry to run and join his fate with Joel's. That wasn't part of my plans at all. If she just stayed home, there would be some problems, but nothing that couldn't be dealt with. She could blame most of the blame on Joel, and her pregnancy was supposed to protect her from most of the trouble. She'd have to answer some tough questions from her partners, and at worst, she'd find herself heavily indebted to them. But there was nothing to avoid but financial ruin and divorce. Maybe later I'd pick her up out of the gutter again. I hadn't thought about it yet. But when she ran off with him, her guilt was confirmed in their eyes as an equal partner in all of Joel's crimes. Maybe he confessed to protect her before he died, absolving her of most of the guilt, but in truth Joel was a weasel, and maybe even tried to pin it on her. That doesn't surprise me in the least. Perhaps their captors didn't care anymore, and they both became redundant. Either way, they died together, awkwardly and without much dignity. I can't say it was exactly what I had in mind when I plotted my revenge, but now it's too late to cry over spilled milk. I launched a few snowballs, and it was my fault that they turned into a huge avalanche. Eventually, the company reopened, but it was never profitable again. With the amount of life insurance money I received after Terry's murder, I offered to buy out the existing stock of the business for pennies. I honestly didn't care if they accepted the offer or not, and I was a little surprised when the Philadelphia gangsters accepted it. I now think that after killing Joel and Terry, they wanted to hide in the shadows and take a more humble position. Surrendering to a poor widower is also good PR, and probably a way to save face in their criminal organization. Now that it's my own company, things are a little better, and we definitely have better financial auditing and controls. The salespeople and support staff now get their commissions and bonuses, too. Things are going pretty well, and I'm usually too busy to think much about the past. But I will say this. The taste of my revenge wasn't as sweet as I had hoped. I don't regret what happened to Joel. He hurt too many other people, and his fate was deserved. But he shouldn't have taken Terry to join in his destruction. Someday I guess I'll have to do something to avenge Terry. I don't know how, when, where, or even why, but someday I will find a way. My wife was a lying cheat and a whore, but she didn't deserve to die the way she did, as a torn and mutilated animal at the hands of psychopaths. I still have Joel's completely untouched money, millions of dollars, and I'm willing to give every penny of it to be able to stand over Terry's grave and say, "I'm sorry this happened to you, baby, but I hunted down and killed every one of the bastards who did this to you." To this day, I'm slowly burning inside with a thirst for revenge, and this time it will be served hot.